Welcome to the T4G video lecture. You should have just completed the 4 videos that cover the tax planning variables: entity, timing, jurisdiction, and character. This video discusses some of the tools at the IRS's disposal that can be used to prevent taxpayers from using the variables to lower tax rates. We've already discussed preventative doctrines such as the assignment of income doctrine and the related party scrutiny. This video covers the 3 big ones. Before we discuss the restrictive doctrines, first I want to provide some hypothetical background. So bond interest is includable in income and has the highest priority. For example, typically the bondholders get paid first before any stockholders do. Interest is subject to ordinary tax rates. Stocks, on the other hand, its dividend is generally subordinate to interest payments on bonds. Dividends aren't fixed, they're declared, but dividends do enjoy preferential tax rates. Obviously, what an investor would really like to find is an investment that has the fixed payment stream of a bond, but also enjoys the preferential tax treatment of a stock investment. So this is not a surprise to anyone. So let's say some really smart attorneys get together and they create something called the STOND, which is a totally fake name, by the way. But let's consider that this is some new form of ownership that provides rights to a fixed payment, but would be treated as a dividend under the tax law. So it's this sort of push and pull between taxpayers and the governments that underpins these restrictive doctrines to tax planning that we're going to talk about for the rest of this video. It's a little bit like enforcing illegal synthetic drugs, not that I would know. But as soon as one formula gets on the controlled substance list, then what happens is a new one that's maybe only slightly different is created. That's not on the controlled substance list, and production and sale begin. So over time, the tax law has built these 3 doctrines in an attempt to avoid kind of strict definitions and use more of a principles-based approach. So these doctrines are the business purpose doctrine, the step transaction doctrine, and the substance over form doctrine. And these all attempt to hold taxpayers to the spirit of the law rather than the letter of the law. So it's just like the spirit of the controlled substance list, right? The idea is to prohibit illegal drugs, but it can be skirted by basic chemists. So the business purpose doctrine requires that whatever the transaction is, it must have some purpose other than only the reduction of taxes. So this the business purpose doctrine is enforced through a more specific doctrine known as the economic substance doctrine. So that doctrine requires that the economics of the deal must hold something other than simple tax savings. So the step transaction doctrine allows the government to treat a series of steps as a single transaction. So if there were a number of steps that a taxpayer was going through to get from, let's say, point A to point B to point C, and point A to point B is tax-free, point B to point C is tax-free, but point A to C is taxable, then the government can come in and say, well, look, you always really meant to go from A to C to begin with. And then lastly, substance over form. That's exactly what it sounds like, right? You look at the substance of the transaction and, of course, not necessarily its form. So take our STOND example, our hypothetical STOND example. Even if the legal analysis under the letter of the law resulted in dividend treatment, it could be that the substance of the ownership rights were more appropriately characterized as debt and therefore would be treated as ordinary income interest. So when taxpayers engage in transactions that meet the letter of the law, but perhaps not the spirit, these are often called tax shelters. So the IRS keeps a list of such transactions, but they're not particularly original up at the service, and so they call them listed transactions. Not particularly inventive on their part. There are a number of rules that penalize taxpayers if they get caught engaging in tax shelters. This brings us to the end of video T4G on tax planning restrictions. It is also our last Chapter 4 video. We move to Chapter 14 next on individual income taxes, and then we're going to bounce back to Chapter 6. Thanks for watching.